Now let's read about what Jesus did when he finished his 6 days of work. God looked with satisfaction upon the work of his hands. All was perfect, worthy of its divine author. And he rested, not as one weary, but as well pleased with the fruits of his wisdom and goodness and the manifestations of his glory. So what did Jesus do on the seventh day? He admired his work. He looked with satisfaction upon his work. In other words, he ceased from working and he enjoyed his work, if you please. Did God rest by himself? Did Jesus rest by himself? No. He invited Adam and Eve to rest with him. You say, how do we know that? Well, Mark 2 verse 27 tells us, and he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. So God invited Adam and Eve to rest with him, to enjoy the works of his hands. That's what we find in Patriarchs and Prophets, page 48. God saw that a Sabbath was essential for man even in paradise. He needed to lay aside his own interests and pursuits for one day of the seven, that he might more fully contemplate the works of God and meditate upon his power and goodness. He needed a Sabbath to remind him more vividly of God and to awaken gratitude, because all that he enjoyed and possessed came from the beneficent Creator. So when Jesus rested on the seventh day, were Adam and Eve working on the seventh day while Jesus rested? No. They entered into his rest. You see, Jesus could rest because he worked. But Adam and Eve had not worked, so they couldn't rest. Rest from what? They entered God's rest and they enjoyed what Jesus had done, not what they had done. And so Jesus then makes the Sabbath holy. The day passes, he has rested, relished his work. Adam and Eve did not work that day. They ceased and they rested with him. And then when the day ended, Jesus made the day holy. Notice Exodus chapter 20 and verses 8 through 11. Exodus 28 through 11. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. Now, why does God say work 6 and rest the seventh? Here's the explanation. For, that means because, in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Therefore, he rested the seventh day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. When did Jesus bless and hallow or sanctify the holy Sabbath? Was it when the seventh day began, or was it when the seventh day ended? When the seventh day ended. So the Sabbath became holy when it ended. After Jesus rested the whole day, he says, now this day is holy. And so what does Jesus do? He's just created the week, because he worked 6 days and he ceased or rested on the seventh day. Now the week is complete. So then he takes the week and he gives it to whom? He takes the week and he gives the week to Adam and Eve. So let me ask you this. Then do Adam and Eve do the same thing the second week that God did the first week? Yeah. They work 6, and then they rest the following 7th day. So the 4th commandment, and when I say this, people are just surprised. The Sabbath commandment applies to Adam and Eve beginning with the 2nd week of human history. The Sabbath, the first Sabbath, does not apply to Adam and Eve. God does not say to them, rest on the Sabbath, and the reason is very simple. Because they hadn't worked, they couldn't rest from their work. Only Jesus could rest from his work. And so then after Jesus worked 6, rested the 7th, then he takes the week and he gives it to Adam and Eve, and he says, okay, now this week is for you, like everything else that I made. This week is for you. So now you're going to work day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then next Sabbath, you are going to do what you saw me do the first Sabbath. So the 4th commandment applies to Adam and Eve beginning in the 2nd week, because they could rest, because the 2nd week they had worked 6. Are you with me or not? Now, we read this statement before in Patriarchs and Prophets, page 111. Why were they supposed to rest on the 7th day? It says the first 6 days of each week are given to man for labor, because God employed the same period of the first week in the work of creation. On the 7th day, man is to refrain from labor in commemoration of the Creator's rest. So when we keep the Sabbath, whose rest are we commemorating? His rest. The Sabbath is not about our rest, it's about entering his rest. Does Satan love the Sabbath? Why does Satan hate the Sabbath? Because the Sabbath reminds us of his arch enemy. Who was he jealous of? Jesus. And it involved directly creation. So do you think that he would hate the Sabbath because it points to Jesus the Creator? Most certainly. You want to know how much Satan hates the Sabbath? I've made a list here of the way that he's tried to demean the Sabbath, because it reminds us of Jesus. Every week that we keep, every week that passes, and when we rest on the 7th day, we are glorifying the Creator, Jesus Christ. We are exalting Jesus Christ. And Satan hates Jesus. So he's got to get rid of the sign or the reminder of Jesus. And by the way, that's why he institutes Sunday, because Sunday brings glory to him. Now, how does Satan show his disgust for the Sabbath? You have at the top of page 440 the ways he does it. In paganism's worship, the sun was worshipped on the venerable day of the sun, on the first day of the week. Is the Sabbath demeaned in the promotion of the theory of evolution? The Sabbath is obliterated by the theory of evolution. Because if the world came into existence by evolution, there is no such thing as a 7-day week where God worked 6 and rested on the 7th. And virtually the whole world believes in the evolutionary theory. He also demeaned the Sabbath by leading the religious leaders in his day, when he came to the earth, to make out of the Sabbath a burdensome day of restrictions. In the Christian world today, they see the Sabbath as a burden, because they're looking at it the way that the religious leaders in Christ's day looked at the Sabbath. In the course of Christian history, you look at Christian history, the Sabbath was pushed lower and lower. and Sunday was pushed higher and higher. And then he leads the papacy to think that it could change God's law by saying that Sunday is the day that we're supposed to keep. And he has convinced Protestantism that that is the true day of worship. And at the end, he is going to get the religious powers to unite with the political powers of the world to give a death decree against those who don't keep it. Why would the devil, through all these methods, make it a top priority to demean and abolish the Sabbath? Because the Sabbath reminds us of the Creator, his enemy, the one who he was envious of, because the Father consulted him, his Son, and did not consult Lucifer.